Welcome back to The Comfy Chairs, a podcast from 123 Limited. This is Kate. Here's a concept we've touched upon but never really explored in The Comfy Chairs: student leadership. My focus as a professional, a teacher, and advisor is to support mid-level managers. I'd like to talk about the next generation of senior leaders who need support and growth opportunities now for when they lead from the top in the future. The logical extension of this work is to move further down the pipeline, isn't it? From managers to supervisors to frontline staff, and maybe even beyond. Naturally, if the goal is to develop leaders, you will see the value of teaching students essential leadership skills. While I'm not here to announce a change to my business, I do want to begin exploring this topic with more intention. For many years, I was fortunate to volunteer with the Leukemia Lymphoma Society's Team and Training Program, raising funds for research and patient services. LLS also supports a program called Student Visionaries, which provides a unique extracurricular opportunity to high school students. While fundraising, these students have the chance to learn how to lead, to organize teams, to set goals, to communicate a vision, just to name a few aspects of what they learn and do. I'm fortunate that my path crossed with Emily Barnett recently, who currently works as a Student Visionary Campaign Development Manager. Before this role, Emily taught high school, and she has a clear picture of the needs that today's students have to learn to lead. Welcome to the Comfy Chairs, Emily. I always like to take a moment so that my guests can introduce themselves. Please.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I am Emily Barnett, and I am a former teacher, and I now work in nonprofit fundraising for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. I'm married, have a 2-year-old daughter named Stella. I'm kind of typical in the sense we spend a lot of time, family and friends, all of that. Free time, I like gardening and thrifting and reading, crafting. It's kind of if a grandmother likes it as a hobby, I'm all about it. So that is,
That's fabulous.
yes, my teenage self would be horrified at how much I just basically want to be my mom and grandma now. But
Right. I think it's such a wonderful natural progression, isn't it? I've realized recently, I'm like, yeah, I'm turning into my mom. I could do a lot worse.
Yes, 100%.
Definitely. Now, you are a former teacher, if I remember correctly, high school, right?
Yes. Middle school and then high school.
Middle school
So,
and high school.
yeah.
All the fun years.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I taught for 6 years total. So I taught 8th grade language arts at middle school in Xenia at Warner. And I'm actually from Xenia, so it was very unique experience. My first classroom was right next door to my 8th grade history teacher. So it was a neat experience. And then I taught for 3 years at Waynesville High School as a 9th grade English teacher.
Excellent.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing that work. And I think the work you're doing now is in some ways equally as important.
Thank you.
Because you're still involved with students as the Student Visionary Campaign Coordinator. But then the Leukemia Lymphoma Society is such a wonderful organization. It's such a great cause. I had an opportunity to be a volunteer with them for a number of years, and they're doing just amazing research. So being able to amplify that even in a little way and get to talk with somebody who is doing this wonderful bridge between that fundraising but also growing youth. I think you're doing something really important and amazing, Emily, and I'm very grateful to have this conversation with you. Well, yeah, and I'm not saying that just because you've agreed to be on the podcast. It's I have a deep commitment to LLS, and as we've talked about when we first met, kind of the longer I think about growing leaders, we do have to be looking further down that road. And as the workforce continues to change, as the workplace continues to evolve, and it just keeps getting faster, As I think about how different things are now from when I entered the workforce about 30 years ago, it's nothing like. People remain the same, but everything around us is changing so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think where I would like us to be able to start is talk sort of first about, from your perspective, both as a teacher and now as someone essentially leading and mentoring students, what skills do you think are most important for, let's say, juniors and seniors, so 16, 17, 18-year olds, to encounter before they enter the workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. This is kind of my jam. This type of conversation, specifically about those skills, I think is so important, especially, there sometimes is an emphasis on, and even just the phrasing of like a soft skill, as maybe not as important as maybe some more technical skills or academic skills or whatever the case. But I think, and personally, I think those are all things you can learn, right? You can always learn how to use Excel. You can always
Yeah.
learn how to what X, Y, and Z. But some of those kind of fundamental, you know, more personality, social skills in that way, it's tough to learn if you are not continuously developed over a long period of time. So I'm really passionate about that. But, one of the biggest, I'd say, is flexibility and dependability. And I think those work together. I think, where you are always going to experience change in your workforce. That is every industry, every job boss, that is so inevitable.
It is.
It's inevitable in your own career. And it just can't be a massive setback every time it happens. And so learning how to adapt in that way, how to be flexible, to think on your feet, all of that, I think is crucial. And I think it's part of showing that you are dependable. If you are always the person that, is having to say, oh, well, that won't work for me. That won't work for me. That won't work for me. You will get that reputation of being less dependable, not someone that people can go to you. And so, obviously within your own personal boundaries and things, whenever you can say yes, whenever you can try to be that team player, try to be dependable. I think that's an underrated way to kind of show your value to an employer. They're not always the person who gets the medal or gets
Yes.
the, but I'm sure I can tell you, a boss knows like who is going to be more difficult about X, Y, and Z than not. And they appreciate
Yeah.
the people who, aren't less so that way. So,
Yeah. It occurs to me, talking about flexibility and dependability, those are life skills. And also, you mentioned soft skills. The term that I've heard that I love and I'm starting to adapt is human skills.
love that.
Right? Because
Love
you're right,
that.
there are technical skills, but then there are human skills, and they are not soft. They
No.
are the hardest ones. I
Yes.
think that's generally accepted, and we just have to change our language. But flexibility and dependability are so interesting to think about for teenagers because
Mm-hmm.
of where they are developmentally,
Mm-hmm.
and providing that thread that they can hold on to as they continue, psychological, physiological, emotional development in the next 10 years of their lives. We have the potential then for those to become habitual as opposed to new
Mm-hmm.
skills, and recognizing that they are not going to always be successful while their prefrontal cortex, this
Absolutely.
is cortexes, I don't know which is correct, well, those are not fully formed yet,
Yeah,
but we're planting seeds for the future, for the
absolutely.
students, but then also for employers too, right?
Absolutely.
Because as those new folks are coming in after graduation or after choosing whatever, their educational paths will be into the workplace, a 22-year-old isn't going to have the same higher thinking skills yet, the executive thinking skills as a 27-year-old or a 40-year-old. But if they've spent the last 5 to 10 years having exposure to that, having it been modeled and set as an expectation, it's going to be easier for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's their muscles that you have to
Yes.
stretch and work. And that's all of those skills, I think, the human skills, if you don't exercise them, if you don't practice them, they're not inherently in us necessarily. I mean, the hunter-gatherer, survival of the
Right.
fittest, whatever mindset, from that evolutionary standpoint, it's not necessarily in our nature to think of others always or think of the grand, larger picture. And so we do have to teach. And what sets humans apart from animal species is that we have the mental capacity to think of larger picture and to, view it from that way. And so it's absolutely a muscle. We have to practice it. We have to have it part of a conversation, because if not, then we can't just expect young people to just have the skill without
No.
having ever been taught it, ever been expected it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's something, if we can't change, so we're talking about students, but there is the change I think that needs to happen on the employer side of the equation as
Absolutely.
well, that you cannot expect your literally entry level employees, the people who are just entering the workforce, to know the things that you know, to know how to navigate. I'm not really a big fan of the generations conversation. I think there's some usefulness for us to have like commonality and alignment with people our own age. I don't think we have to label people based on their age though. That really it's parenting, historical events, that sort of shared experience, and technology are the things that really tell us more about people's behaviors and attitudes. And I think we've created a lot of unnecessary conflict because we label generations. And there are so many different stages of life represented in the workplace now that it's understandable that sometimes leaders forget that my newest employees don't know what my more tenured employees do. And it happens to be an age differentiation. But if we can equip those newer folks, those students who have become part of the workforce over time, if we can equip them with some of the language and understanding, even if they don't yet have the skills, I think it'll make it easier for everyone. But the employers have to recognize there's no way that a first time job holder can know what's expected of them.
And it's not a secret that it's a first time job.
Right.
When you hire them, you look at the resume, there has to be some level of understanding on the employer that of what you're getting into. That's, and so, yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And I think the thoughts on like generations, I think it's a really interesting point. And, I don't know that I had ever really had a super active opinion on it much as far as the terminology, but I definitely can see your point in what you're saying. And I think it's both and. I think that there's definitely merit to noticing patterns and trends among various groups and, what that says about them, whatever else. But I also think there's a weird level of competition that comes into play. There's that's a whole other, there's so many reasons for that, but it's something I saw in teaching a lot. You'll see like sort of the disgruntled person who's close to retirement, who's been around forever, who, often will look at the new teacher as if they are just so naive and, bright-eyed.
Because
And
they and so were you 40
so were
years ago.
Yeah. And just that odd competition of, if they're enjoying themselves, does that reflect poorly on me, or there's definitely society, the culture at large doesn't always value age. And in fact, quite the opposite sometimes, where, youth is this immortalized thing. So the one thing that some of these employees who've been around a while maybe feel they have the edge over is experience. And so if there's belittling to be had, sometimes that is the case because everyone's always going to grasp it.
Right. My back may hurt every single day when I wake up, but at least I know how to get this job done without having to ask anyone.
Correct. Right. Yeah.
That's an interesting point, that some of that tension comes from, we do idealize youth, and the whole youth is wasted on the young. Yeah, it is.
We idealize it and we also mock it.
Yeah. Marginalize it at the same time that we hold it up. And that creates a horrible circumstance.
No wonder for young people navigating that, it's so confusing.
Yeah. Yeah. But at the same time, as parents, we've been teaching those folks who are 16, 17, let's say up to 20, we've been 22 or older, we've been teaching them how to advocate for themselves, how to take better care of their mental health. We've demonstrated that, one, you can't have it all, and two, work-life balance is another lie, frankly. So you have to make difficult choices about, how much am I going to work? How am I going to live? Because it can't be this perfectly separated thing. So it's no surprise that with all of the information available to folks, with the way we are raising, are we on alpha at this point that we would be talking about it? Yes. Even though I'm generations bleh.
But I think alphas, the youngest alphas, I think have been born, and I'm not sure what the one after. I think my daughter is alpha.
Yeah.
But I think I lose track too.
This is part of my point about the generations, is there's no authority that defines it.
No.
And,
yeah.
There's people also align themselves one way or the other based on what is appealing to them, but I digress. Anyway, so let's say these young adults, we've raised them, we have set examples for them, good and bad, and now we put them into an environment that does not match what they've been taught and what they've seen. And employers are surprised that they're dissatisfied with their circumstances. And objectively, that's just silly.
Yeah, when I was thinking about some of these things, a lot of it is the concept of the sweater, where if you pull a little bit of a thread, the whole thing could unravel, where it's a multifaceted problem. It's an extremely complicated problem. What we are seeing in the workforce today of just high turnover or lacking in skills, all of these things that we're hearing about, it's an extremely complicated problem that doesn't really have a good single one solution.
It does
not.
I
think that's discouraging. And I think there's a lot of kind of burying heads in the sand about it to, just not, I don't really want to unravel the whole thing. I'm not really ready to go that deep. And so we'll just kind of put a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think a huge part of the shift we've been seeing in the last, 20 or so years is that we've got Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid. And underneath that whole Band-Aid, there is an infected wound that we never have dealt with. That's a really gross analogy, but
it is. The modern workplace is kind of a gross thing right now.
And I don't know that there is any one singular answer, but I think it's a big piece of it is there needs to be some priority shifting, at least at the employee or employer level. We, instead of thinking of, volunteerism or mentoring or X, Y, and Z as extras in addition to your work, that should be that should be an integral, if not one of the top parts, because how are you ever going to continue to populate your workplace, your workforce, if there's no investing happening into youth, into those are your next workers?
Exactly.
It is your problem.
Yeah.
It is your problem to have and to fix and to do your part, that your community and how it's thriving, that is your problem as an employer. And, how your schools are doing, how that happiness factor people feel to stay in their job, that is your problem as a boss. And if your thoughts on mentoring and volunteering and X, Y, and Z, if it's, I'll do this here and there a little bit, I will do it to kind of appear to show up in that way, but not necessarily make it part of my workplace culture, it's, you might as well not at all. I mean, it's good to do a little good, I guess, better than nothing.
I think
But yeah.
you have covered, well, one, a couple of really good points and some things that I think are important to sort of move into some of the further subjects I want to talk about. You are absolutely 100% totally, entirely correct that there is not one single simple solution to the issues that we've been discussing and that the global workforce is facing. I think you are also correct that some people see that and they respond with despair or indifference because it is big and complex. I think the other thing that I love hearing is that if you are a leader in any capacity, your responsibilities don't end at your office door, essentially, metaphorically, that you are also responsible for ensuring not just the succession into your role, but how are we pulling people into the external pipeline? And that includes young adults. And I know there are a lot of employers who are thinking about this. It is not a brand new idea, but I think to your point, we have to stop viewing it as extra, that it needs to become part of how we do our business. So this is then to get us to talking about, so we can't solve it all, but we can start making changes, identifying the fact that one of the things to do is to consider making leadership include responsibilities for student mentoring. That's where I want to go next, is what are some of the things that can be done? How can we start introducing these essential skills like flexibility and dependability to young adults now and not when they enter the workforce?
Yeah. So it's a big question.
It is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because it's something that, just like we've been talking about, it has to be done concurrently with potential systemic changes, things of that nature. That's all. It's, but you can't wait for those things to happen. You sit around and just say, well, I'll bring more people in when this thing stops, that thing. That only pushes the can further down the road and makes it someone else's problem later. And, it's that kind of that me mindset. A lot of times it's the younger generations, so to speak, they get kind of labeled with that. They're the me. But, ask someone who is high up in their business to, put themselves in a risky situation, and you might see that the me is not just young people, and, it's all of us. And, there's some human nature there. But I think if on a personal individual level, you do not believe in collective good, that's you kind of have to, that's kind of a starting point. And if not, then I don't know I can have a conversation with someone who kind of doesn't fundamentally have that idea. If you don't understand that everyone benefiting and doing well benefits everyone else, you know, I don't know how to help you with that. But if you do understand that, then we can talk and we can have some solutions that we, can problem solve. I think, again, if your focus is that it's an integral part of your business, if you believe that investing in your employees' happiness and satisfaction is important, if you believe that it's essential for your business, that's a huge first stepping point. So once you get to that point, truly, I think mentorship is easy once you are doing it in that sense, because really all you have to do is authentically share your experiences, your lived experiences. That is the best way, for I think all of us on some level have to learn things the hard way. We really,
Yeah.
that's and I think the best thing a mentor can do is to give the knowledge they have learned the hard way so that it's hopefully a little bit less challenging for that person receiving the information.
Yeah. Well, it's also being mentored doesn't mean that you're never going to make a mistake.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's not like a fast pass, it's not a cheat code. It is a way for us to, as you talked about, to create this mutuality that my mistakes, my learnings, my successes even can guide you to getting to better faster, and that we all become better as a result of this. When you were talking, I was reminded of a book I just read. The title of this book is The Service Berry. It's a very short book. It's just like this lovely little volume talking about collaboration and mutuality. And it's just so the service berry, the example of the service berry is that by providing fruit, it creates, it continues its own existence because of the birds and other animals that eat it and make it possible for its seed to spread. But it's also feeding. The author talks about the experience of harvesting service berries with her neighbors and how that's creating community. And I think that's where we're headed is, do we see ourselves as part of this whole? And there can still be competition, but not competition at the expense of our continual shared growth.
Absolutely.
And the way employers and leaders can contribute to that is by disseminating their knowledge, their berries, if you will, the fruit of what they've done and learned to that next generation. So this is a shameless plug for the work that you do, because I think something like Student Visionaries is one avenue, one pathway that leaders can look at, community leaders can look at, how can I get involved and help these students, not just in terms of donations and fundraising. What are some other, what opportunities does your program provide? And then as a former teacher, what are programs and other ways of leaders mentoring students that you've seen be effective?
Well, first, I'm going to touch on something kind of with that idea of service berries that I'm reminded of because, I think I'd be remiss to not bring it up in this setting. It's very much, we're talking a lot about the Indigenous idea of 7 generations ahead.
Yeah.
It's not just, Native American Indigenous cultures, but there's many Indigenous cultures that have this concept. I'm most familiar with it in that way. I just read a really great book, Braiding Sweetgrass.
Author. It's the
Yep.
same
Oh,
author.
is it really?
Yeah.
How funny. That is, I had no idea.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. It was a similar thought process. I'm not surprised then that I was hearing it. But so if you're not familiar with that concept, it's the idea that, every current person needs to be thinking in terms of how to benefit the seven generations out. And, the number is, to my understanding, arbitrary. It's more so just to be thinking of your future, of the future lives of others, that it's, again, not as much a me mindset as a we, and seeing this collective good. And I think that the service berries mindset kind of fits into that as well. It's, is the success of your individual company worth the expense for 7 generations from now? Is that, I think that's a good model to keep in business as well, is, are you doing harm to those who come after you? And, that's not to say that there's anything we can do that will have zero harm to anyone ever. I mean, I'm realistic in that way. But I think even just having the thought, even just having that conversation, the desire to want to leave things better for others, that's a huge first step. And so to what that looks like for Student Visionaries and, just mentoring in general. So Student Visionaries, I guess I'll kind of explain what it is. So I work for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, and it is the kind of leader in the nonprofit world of blood cancers specifically. So we work on research, we fund advocacy efforts, we fund patient care, lots of things, and it's all for blood cancer patients. Now, a lot of the work we do does end up benefiting other cancer types, which is great, but that's kind of our bread and butter. And so we're a nonprofit.
It's another example of the work we do benefits everyone.
Yes.
The research being done, funded by LLS, impacts other cancer treatment.
Yes. Breast and brain in particular are some that we see huge overlap with. Absolutely. Yeah. And even just, we're currently putting quite a bit of focus on pediatric cancers. That's going to benefit not just blood cancer pediatric patients, but pediatric patients as a whole.
Yes.
So yeah, that's who LLS is. As far as Student Visionaries, we are a nonprofit organization. We don't charge our patients for our education services, things of that nature, but obviously the money comes from somewhere, and it is donation driven in that way. And so, we could just hire a bunch of people to cold call and, go through, we don't have a phone book anymore, but go through the phone book, so to speak, and, cast a wide net, see what we get. But that's not very efficient. That's not a great use of, donor dollars for staff. We try to be really efficient as an organization with how we sustain ourselves and then provide those services. And so fundraising is where that comes in. We have lots of different fundraising campaigns, ways that we earn these dollars. The one that I work for in particular is called Student Visionaries of the Year, and it exists in Dayton as one of many nationally where these campaigns exist. And so it's small in the sense that the one I run is the Dayton campaign, but there are others like it. Another one we have in Dayton is Light the Night. And so Student Visionaries is, if I were to give a really short elevator pitch, I'm kind of a chronic over-explainer.
Oh, high school teacher.
Yeah. So if I were to give it in a short elevator pitch, it is a philanthropic leadership development program and fundraising competition for high school age students. That is at its core what it is. That long answer is we are a peer-to-peer campaign, which again, nonprofit kind of the industry term, but peer-to-peer campaigns are how we utilize an individual fundraiser's personal network to kind of get the job done. Again, the example I always use with students is, your great Aunt Sally, right? Your great Aunt Sally does not know me. And so if I send great Aunt Sally a letter saying, donate to LLS, great Aunt Sally is probably going to think it's a scam and throw it away. Rightfully so. She doesn't know me. I have no relationship with her. But, if I give an opportunity to a high school student, if I embolden them, if I give them, if they're getting something out of that equation as well, beyond just doing good, right? Great Aunt Sally, who loves her niece, her high school niece, wants her to do well, wants her to thrive, sees this amazing opportunity. Great Aunt Sally's probably going to donate to her more so than to me. And so that's what a peer-to-peer campaign is. Our teams of volunteer fundraisers dip into their personal networks. And for us, the staff, it's recruiting, cultivating, mentoring, all of that through the process. But it's really our volunteers it's their campaign. They are running it. And I mean, they are doing the work. And so it's unique in that way. I think, we're not the only charitable organization that does peer-to-peer campaigns, but I think some of the ways we do things with students are kind of unique, not to, of course, I think it's good. I'm not to brag on that,
Well,
but
that's good that you work for the organization.
I
It's good you
do,
think
yeah.
it's special.
Yes. But I think my perspective as having been a high school teacher is unique of that in that I have seen so many different programs come through different schools, and they're great. I think student council is amazing. I did student council as a student. I was an advisor, National Honor Society. They're great. Everyone has those. All of those students that are competing for some of these, like, not even just college admittance. I think we see even more competition now amongst like scholarships and things, or even just resume builders, because not everyone's going to go to college. So it's, diversifying their portfolio in some way. This is a very unique opportunity, something that not every high school does, not every high school student within that particular high school is doing. It's got that exclusivity, and it gives a chance for students to have actual real world practice as opposed to mock types of things. A lot of traditional programs in schools, there's a mock element of it, like a mock debate or this or that. Great, wonderful practice.
Yes.
You cannot replace that with true experience. And so within the Student Visionaries program, we have candidates, which are our student leaders, and they are essentially running for the title of Student Visionary of the Year. And it's awarded to the candidate and the candidate team in that area who raises the most funds at the end of a 7-week period.
Okay.
And so prior to those 7 weeks, that's when a lot of the work is done. That's when a lot of the conversations with me, the planning, the mentoring tends to happen. Once the competition kicks off, it's still there. It's just, it changes in the need a bit. There's a lot more, you can do it. It's okay, keep going, and pivoting. So a lot of that. Yeah. So within that, we encourage students to reach out to their networks, reach out to their parents' networks. We encourage them to reach out to corporate sponsorships. That's one piece I think super unique about the program. Not many high schoolers might have an opportunity to stand in front of the decision maker at a 6-figure company.
No.
That might not be something they would ordinarily have the chance to do. They could have the chance to do that with this program. They can network with influential people in their community, all kinds of things like that. They lead teams.
Yeah.
And ultimately they get to earn volunteer hours and have a really cool resume boost. So that's what the program is. So, your question of types of mentoring that I have seen, this is a great one.
Yeah,
this is a great
definitely.
example of that.
Well,
it's definitely not the only one, though.
I love the model that's baked into that. You talked about present them with an opportunity and embolden them. So that's the model. We provide opportunities to do the thing. Let's take dependability. You can even do this. Frankly, you could do this with your own kids if you think about it in this way. But if you have the opportunity to work with or mentor students that aren't part of your family, what is that opportunity for dependability? Maybe it's checking in by a certain time or providing an update, sending an email.
Filling deadlines.
Yeah, a deadline, or attending something. You give them the support by being really clear about this is how to go about doing it. Here are your guide rails. Here are the resources to help you. You let them have the experience of doing it, and then help them connect how their activity, their action, their choices led to the result that they got. And frankly, that's just management, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Here's the expectation, your opportunity. Here's the support that you'll receive. Your actions lead to results. And there's feedback and learning that happens throughout that cycle.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is definitely this is not a groundbreaking
No.
unique thing in that way. It says, it's very kind of par for the course, and that's not to say it's completely average or anything like that, but that's the motto that employers that's it's what this conversation we've been having, if you want X to happen, you have to provide the steps for how to get to X. And if you don't, you cannot be upset when X does not happen. Kind of going to, what can schools do, or what can we do, or what is that good mentorship going to look like? I think, you know, the the biggest thing people can do is to be authentic. I think, when you are posturing yourself as someone who has it all together all the time, you lose everyone. You will never win people over by never showing any weakness, never showing vulnerability. To shift that mindset from seeing your failures as this horrible thing to never discuss, never whatever. Failure's a good thing. It's a good thing to learn so much from it. And it says you tried. If you have not failed at anything, you have not ever once put yourself out there. And I don't trust a leader like that.
No.
Myself. I trust the ones who have the courage and ambition to be vulnerable, to try new things, and admit when they have failed, see how to fix it, and move on. I think it's an incredible teacher in, figuring out how to invest into your own community, invest into the youth in your community or wherever, invest into the new workers. It will yield positive long-term impact on you as a person and your business. It will.
Yeah. I recently met someone who is self-described as a serial tech startup
Okay.
executive.
Interesting.
Here's someone whose work, whose business, whose bread and butter is always being at the beginning stages, like get it stood up, sell it, go to the next. And I was telling her that my area of specialty is succession planning and talent development. So identifying who today can be leaders tomorrow and what are the programs and support that take to get from A to B. She's like, I don't know if that has a place in startups. I said, well, I can make an argument for it actually, that because startups have to get to a point where they transition from starting to operating. And if you're baking in this idea of we have that long view and we're thinking about how will we lead going forward, what roles will we need to accomplish that next stage of work, you're creating this path that's going to allow for longevity over time. And I think that is the very same mindset that we need to push beyond the workplace and into our school systems, our communities, whether it's your church or a community center or your neighborhood, whatever that looks like for you. Are you beyond the point of here's what we need today? Because that is a startup mentality that won't necessarily go the distance. Your example of the 7 generations, I think, is wonderful. I think it's 7 generations, if I think about it. That is typically the most that any person will know, going back to great grandparents and forward to great grandchildren. I am thinking beyond my frame of reference, beyond what I will experience. Thinking about how do we grow students to become leaders at any level is a way to prepare legacy.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the larger conversation being had kind of just in general with global workforce, I think there's is a season of growing pain where it is square peg round hole. There are certain ways things have always been done that we have just operated in that, quite frankly, are just not going to work anymore. And, we can continue to try to square peg round hole. We can try to shape ourselves into, try to force it to be what it's been, but it's really not, that's not realistic either. It's, you have to take apart the round hole, so to speak, of
Right.
this square and build something that will fit where we are heading. And it, to deny that, to act as though, you know, and I hate this is something I've seen a lot with education. There's so much emphasis on like, well, COVID did this or that. COVID didn't do. This is, we are
COVID
these are
exposed.
problems that it exposed. These are problems that have been building and building for decades. And
Oh yeah.
COVID, what it did was it brought it to the forefront. It was a stop. It was a stop in that cycle that we've been in, to where we kind of had that opportunity to slow down and really look and see. And so then now trying to go back into this mindset of where we've always been, when we've become aware of those issues, it just, yeah.
Well, frankly, it's as behind the times as the workplace is. Education isn't keeping pace either. We're still educating people to enter the industrial workplace.
My gosh.
We're still working on this, like, you're going to become somebody that works in a factory. That
School
is
bells.
the methodology.
That is.
That's the
Yeah.
methodology that was established, 100, 150 years ago, and it's not really evolved yet. So, and the workplace is still treating people like shift workers. We zoomed past knowledge work, and we've gotten, now that we are in this post-industrial information cloud age, we are not educating people or creating jobs yet, other than through like absolute necessity, because all of these gaps are being realized. We're responding as opposed to planning.
Absolutely.
And I think the disconnect between business and education that's existed for a long time, like education was just always going to be the funnel. We can't have a line between them anymore, because there has to be this flow of information about need and capability constantly. And it's not just the educators or the administrator. There has to be this interaction with the student body as well. And it's a chance for leaders and experts to be more engaged with those centers of education in their communities, so that the people that either come to work with them or take their roles or start filling jobs that never existed before, they're already part of that community at that point. I think, interestingly, we will probably end up sort of make this full circle back to like apprentice and journeyman practices.
Even though we progress technologically, we kind of go back to those old systems in a lot of ways.
All of this comes down to, whether you're talking about your current employees or the future employees, little decisions will get you where you need to go.
Absolutely.
And you have that opportunity every day, every choice, to model what you want, both what you want for yourself, for the team, for the business, and that will have an impact. It can be enough.
It can.
I can't think of a better place to kind of get to in this conversation, from talking about what is it our children need from us now to be successful in the workplace later. They need flexibility. They need dependability, both as what they receive and how they behave. And the way we get to that is in our small decisions today.
It's in accountability. It's in building that stamina. It's in nurturing. That cannot be excluded and left out. It's in vulnerability and apologizing and coping and being able to pivot to something new. I mean, it's in all of that. It's, from, all of these are sort of the ambiguous pieces. From a practical perspective, it's okay, if you're a community leader and it's important to you that students have the ability to have leadership, is there a program you can invest in? Schools can't have it as an afterthought either. It has to be
Correct.
integral as well, but they need help to make that happen. They need monetary support. They need leaders in the community who will volunteer time, or their knowledge, whatever that looks like. And it doesn't have to be with a big organization. It can be small. It can be your individual community, a small scale. Those small individual pieces, it adds up.
Can't see ourselves like people are like, I don't have kids in the school system.
Oh,
I don't
hate that argument.
Yeah, you do. You do.
You do.
Because those kids are going to grow up, and if they stay in the community, one, they're going to be your neighbors. They're going to be taxpayers.
They're going to be your nurses in the nursing home.
Yeah, I was going to say your lawyers, your doctors, your, the cooks at the restaurants. If they leave the community, that is all of that resource leaving. So we all have children in our school systems. We all have connections in our communities. A good friend of mine talks about parenting as your job is to put awesome people into the world.
100%. Awesome people make for an awesome world.
Right?
And who doesn't want that?
I want it.
I do. I find me someone who does it. And we all have different ideas of how that's done. And I think that's what a lot of it boils down to is assume good intentions and assume everyone, and try to be someone who is leading with that good intent. And
yeah,
it doesn't have to be hard.
It does not. It most certainly does not. Wonderful. Well, Emily, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it.
Happy to do it for sure. And thank you for continuing to care about LLS. I think that's so lovely.
Anytime I can tell people about the great work LLS is doing, I am there for it.
My favorite Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote is to fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very much what our conversation has been. It's, you're going to get great leaders if you are leading in a way that will make others want to be a part of things with you.
Yeah.
And that is how you will see success. That is how you will see your goals met. Great conversation, Kate. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me today. If this conversation sparks something useful, please follow the Comfy Chairs and leave a review. Those small actions help more people find the show. Got a leadership question like featured in a Future Company HQ episode? Please send it my way. I'd love to hear what's on your mind. And when you're ready to move from ideas into action, 123 Limited helps leaders build stronger teams, sharper strategies, and better talent plans. Learn more at 123limited.com. That's ONE23ltd.com. Thanks for listening.